Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cucina Aurora Kitchen Witchery podcast for another fabulous episode of Conversational Witchcraft. Really intriguing guest we have today, Terence P Ward. Terence has been a journalist and a practicing pagan for more than 30 years, and in that time has been bound to a Wiccan coven and communed with the earth as a backpacking pagan or Gaiaped, which I think is amazing. A member of the Order of the Occult Hand, Ward is also a temple priest of Poseidon through the Temenos Oikidios in Rhode Island and holds ministerial credits from the Vermont-based Church of the Sacred Earth, a Union of Pagan Congregations. Terence, welcome. I am so happy to have you here. Your wonderful new book, which we're going to talk about later, popped up on my radar just a few weeks ago. And I thought, holy crap, how come no one has done this before? And I immediately reached out to you and your response was, we know each other. I was like,
it's true.
And now I see your face and I'm like, oh yeah, we met once like a million years ago.
Yeah, it wasn't any time recently.
No, right? It was like, it had to be 10 years ago, right?
Easily. Yeah, nobody knew who you were yet.
I don't know who I am. Who am I? I'm just a little Italian meatball talking about kitchen witchery and food magic. We were in Vermont, right? At Kirk White's.
Yes, Laurel
right?
and Retreat.
Laurel and Retreat, and it was like just a very small retreat. What was it? Solstice? Were we there for summer solstice?
Probably Lunasa.
That's
when they usually have an annual event.
And I feel like we were in the same space, but maybe we weren't, like, we didn't like hang out.
Yeah, it was a small gathering, so everyone kind of knew each other, but yeah, I don't know if we were both dancing late around the fire. I tend to crash.
I tend to crash too. I like to watch people dancing out there. I'm not the most fit, so I don't do the physical stuff. I'll do the eating things and then I watch people be physical, but I do the cooking and then the eating, and then I'm too tired to do the dancing, if I'm being entirely honest. So I'm really happy to have you here. Like I said, I literally came across, somebody posted your book. I don't know where, I Instagram something, and it's called Empty Cauldrons, Navigating Depression Through Magic and Ritual. And this is, I just got my copy like a week ago. So I'm going to be like super honest. And I'm going to tell you, I haven't started reading it. I've read like the introduction. But it is, for me, I feel like this is something that is really, really necessary right now. And this book did just come out, right? I mean, we're recording this in January and it just came out. When was the release date?
2 weeks ago, on the 7th.
Yay. So am I your first podcast about the book?
You're actually the second, because another one went live like 2 months ago because the host was so excited. She said, this can't wait.
So tell us a little bit about why this book and why now?
Well, I'll start by talking about why there hasn't been this book.
Yeah, why the fuck has there not been this book?
Because nobody who's experienced depression wants to write it. Because that's part of the nature of depression, is to not talk about it, not think about it, because if you think about it, then it's going to come back, you think.
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
And the reason why I was led to write this book is because I chose a few years ago to write a blog post about it, and my future editor for this book paid attention to it and has been keeping it in mind ever since. And when Heather became an editor at Llewellyn, she said, I think you need to write that book. It's like, what book?
Yeah. I mean, you feel like, God, especially through the pandemic, right? So many of us have, even if we had little bits of, I think, first of all, let's say this, I think everyone deals with some sort of mental illness, whether it is depression, anxiety. I don't necessarily think that that's exclusive to any one particular group of people or one particular type of person. I think to put out something that is specifically a witchcraft book that deals with depression, and how to use magic and ritual in our crafts to help deal with that. I think it's really an important topic. And I would assume that your blog post that you're talking about that led to this was through your own personal struggles and your own personal journey. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah. What the central thesis of the blog post, which really led to the thesis of the book, is that depression is a spirit, and it really has a relationship with you, whether you want it to or not. I've through my struggles, mostly as a late teen and young adult, I came to recognize that there's really a voice in your head that's giving you opinions in your own voice that aren't so good for you. And
Yep.
it can take a lot of effort and discernment to figure out that there's someone else giving you these ideas and that they aren't coming from you.
Right, that they were planted there by someone else, some experience that happened in formative years, or some information you took in. I call that the tapes. Like I do, because I grew up in the 80s. So, younger people are like, tapes, what the fuck are tapes? Tapes for me, it's like tapes in my head that go on repeat, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually you say, when you start to become aware, you're like, wait a minute. Is that my voice? Whose voice is that? Because you think it's yours, but then you realize maybe it's not. Right? Like,
yeah.
Is that something that you experienced?
Yeah. My peak experience, or my trough experiences with depression were pretty rough. It was the kind of experience where you have physical difficulty with even getting out of bed. Being able to form coherent thoughts is really a challenge. And even though this is not the experience for the majority of people who endure depression, I did in fact attempt to take my life more than once. And it was intervention from that really led me to recognize that there was a description for what I was going through, because I had no clue what it was. And that's actually circling back to how we met. When I was hospitalized, it was Kirk White and his wife Amy who came to see me as ministers, and that was a very helpful thing.
Sure. Wow. Well, first of all, thank you so much for being so open and sharing that personal information with us. I think it's incredibly important for those of us that have suffered with any kind of mental illness to be able to talk about it, so that other people know that you can deal and get through and they're not alone. And so many of us have these situations. And I think specifically in the witchcraft community, there may be this idea of, I should be able to handle this. Mm-hmm. I should be able to, I had to light a candle or make a spell or go to a ritual and deal with it, and it should be fine. And the truth is, for me anyway, the pagan path or the witchcraft practice is a tool to help me persevere or help me deal with, but it is not a cure-all.
You're not going to cure depression with a spell.
So important.
There's a wonderful spell that one of my contributors gave me to help find a good therapist.
Right, because that's what you need.
It is what you need. And I talk about how yourself has three aspects. You are a spirit, you are a body, and you are mind. And depression hits all of them. And you need to be able to treat it through the body and through the mental processes, like a counselor, and also by engaging with it spiritually. And that's something that a lot of people don't do, but it shouldn't be the only thing you do.
Right. So I will share with you a story. I have a friend who she's struggled with mental illnesses for a long time. And I would say to her all the time, have you looked for a therapist? Okay. So I am a huge proponent of therapy. I've been in therapy pretty much for the greater part of the last 15, 18 years. Even when I moved, I had have phone sessions, and, I personally think that therapy and emotional intelligence and knowing yourself is the key to kind of everything, whether it's witchcraft or business or relationships, or healthy people have therapy, sick people have hospitals, right? So it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you if you go to therapy. In fact, it means there's something right with you because you are seeking the help that you need. And who the fuck can do life on their own? I don't know. You know what I mean? Nobody can do life on their own. It's hard. And I would say to her, have you found a therapist? Let's talk about going to therapy. Let's do that. And she's like, no, I did a crystal grid and I pulled my cards and I got this really great new incense and I made this really great tea. And I'm like, all of that is awesome. All of that is awesome, but it counts for nothing if you're not doing the work, right? I really would like for you to elaborate more on this 3 mind, body, spirit, and how they work together to overcome or to work together to deal with these issues. Because I think you get people that are on one side of the coin or the other, or one of those sides, right? One side of this triangle, they're like, oh, I'm just going to work out and that's going to give me all the endorphins I need to deal with my mental illness. Or I'm just going to go to therapy and that's only going to be the thing that I do. And I'm not going to be in touch with my spiritual self. What are your feelings on that? And can you speak on that at all?
Sure. When it comes to the body, I think it's important. The way I see it is that that's where the emotions are. That's where they begin. They come to the mind, but they emerge from the body. It's in the set of your jaw, the clenched fist, the fluttering in your stomach, the sweat. It's an ancient evolutionary aspect that is where all of our emotions come from, especially fear, which is probably the oldest emotion. And because we have such an advanced brain that has less evolved portions on the inside, it incorporates it right in what the chemicals that are released by the emotions, and thus they feel like thoughts. And thus we think that we're thinking our emotions into being, but it's actually the opposite. Our emotions are the ones that are coloring our thoughts and changing how we regard something. If I came to this in a really crappy mood, I probably would think you have a sarcastic attitude, which you don't. But if I have a dark mood going on because I stubbed my toe or something, it's those emotions coming into my thoughts are going to color them in a really nasty way. And depression has a way of pumping through the worst of your emotions into your thoughts, which is why therapy, which engages with both of the thoughts and the emotions, can be very helpful, but so can relaxation and meditation techniques, because they can help you become aware of what your body is doing as well as what your thoughts are doing, so that you can release them and move on to something else. Now, the spiritual aspect is a little bit trickier, because one of the things that can happen in depression is that you can feel completely cut off from the gods, from spirits, from magic. That does not appear to be the case, but you do tend to be a bit more oblivious to it. One of my contributors, Courtney Weber, talked about how she was asked to cast a spell when not in a good state of mind, and feels that she might have set someone's house on fire.
Oh no, that's a very Courtney thing to say. She is the best. But it's true that those emotions, I've never thought about it that way, in terms of the emotion colors the thought. I've always thought about it the other way, where the thought to get your thoughts on straight, to calm those, as we said, those tapes. And what are the words I'm using to myself to sort of understand the emotion? Why is that emotion the way it is? As opposed to the emotion is the first thing that then colors the thought. I think that's a really wonderful way of looking at that.
That's why you shouldn't do it on an empty stomach.
Shouldn't do anything on an empty stomach, especially grocery shopping. That's the worst.
Angry is a thing.
Yes, it really is. Right. Because that's kind of like the perfect example of what you're saying. The physical, the emotional, and the thoughtful, right? If one of those pieces is out of whack, the rest of them will be colored by that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. The idea that we're more than one aspect, we're still one being. And that's something that's sometimes hard to get our minds around.
So you have spent a lifetime, as a journalist and, as walking this pagan path and being grounded in your beliefs. Can you tell us how you got from where you were to where you are along that spiritual path, and how that might have dovetailed in with the work that you've done dealing with depression and helping others deal with depression?
I think that in my earlier years, it was a real challenge for me to find my spiritual footing, because this thing was in my way. And it really was a struggle. It wasn't that I certainly have had intense spiritual experiences even in my teens and 20s back in the 80s. But having this other spirit walking with me made it really hard to have the confidence that I was on the right path, and I was often unsure of myself. But it turns out the gods often have a plan, and if you don't understand the plan, they sometimes repeat it louder or in different words.
That is so true.
And I have found that sometimes this can feel rather like a mental health breakdown or an emotional crisis.
Right.
And that and one of the things that I explained to people about how I became a Hellenic polytheist, following the Greek gods in a way that's attempts to be like the ancient practices, but probably isn't. Let's be honest. I try, but there's only so much we can do except listen to what we're asked to do. But when I was having a particularly low point, maybe 15 years ago, I got a shout from Ares, who in the mythology is known for being extremely loud, like 9,000 soldiers loud. And that made me wake up to the fact that maybe there's a set of gods out there who have some idea what to do next. And that's how I got onto this current path. And honestly, even though I've had my challenges over the years with depression, my worst is long behind me. It seems to be that if you survive the first wave of depression, if you're unlucky enough to get other waves of depression, over time they aren't going to suck as much. Either we get used to them, or like COVID, it seems to get less powerful with the new iterations. I don't know. But either way, age and experience has also helped me say, oh, something really crappy is about to happen. I should plan for this. And what I find is the best thing to do to plan is to take a step back and think about my external commitments and say, well, maybe I need to refocus some of that energy on my relationships with my gods and my family and myself, and use some more of that time to kind of shore up my inner self, because I'm probably going to have a rough few days or weeks as opposed to months, because that's another thing that seems to happen, is it does tend to get shorter in time for a lot of the people I talk to.
I think that's a really important concept. The idea of being able to see, and I think, if we go a little bit further backwards, I like to start where I want to finish. Like whenever I'm planning something, I like to start where I want to finish and work my way backwards. Right. That's how I plan. Some people plan in a more linear, straightforward, and I'm always the opposite. But to understand, to start with self-awareness, to start with, I see this coming. I can feel it coming on. I know my own patterns. So I know that this thing maybe I'm facing at work or with family might trigger these things in me. So let me dig in to my comforts and my strengths of family, home, God's spirit, so that I'm armed properly to deal with what's about to come, and giving myself a soft place to ride out what's about to come. I think that's a really great way of thinking about it. And, something that I've heard quite a bit over the last year in talking to other people in the community is that they don't feel like they're as connected with spirit as they were before the pandemic. Collectively as a people, we're dealing with so much angst and so much depression and so much hurt due to just the world at large, right? That I think this advice of going back to what you're talking about, focusing on my home, my family, my spiritual practice as that soft space to land is so important for everyone, even people that don't identify with, oh, I suffer with depression, or can't say that out loud, or don't know that's how they're feeling. I mean, that's great advice for anybody, Terence. Like that's, it's brilliant to me. And I'd love to know if you have any specific techniques that you would advise to do for that. Is that what we will find in your book? Those techniques?
Yes. One of the things, because I'm guilty of being a writer, is I find benefit in writing. And I do talk about the using a journal or more than one journal as a way to help process thoughts, to kind of physically get them out of your body so you can look at them. I like the idea of being able to physically get things out of my head to look at them. And in fact, I have an entire ritual cycle built on creating a totem for your depression and inviting it to move in.
Wow.
And giving it offerings so that it'll be comfortable staying there instead.
Wow. What a fantastic concept of acceptance, and saying this, like you said at the very beginning, depression is spirit, is a spirit that comes to walk with you. And I think so many people look at that and go, I don't want it. Get out of here. I can't deal with you. I'm going to ignore. And they, first of all, they won't talk about it out loud. And then they also won't talk about it to themselves. So for you to say, let's build it a totem and invite it in, woof, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Wow. And what does that look like for you?
The totem design that I developed is uses, well, part of the idea I got from Byron Ballard. I don't know if you know Byron Ballard.
Heard of him, yes.
Of her, actually.
Oh, Byron, yes. Heard the name.
in one of Byron's books, there's talk about exposed tree root, which is a wonderful magical thing from Byron's tradition that is used for tangling things up. And I use that as the basis for this thing. And then we just add little bits of black thread to it over time. And each one has a prayer associated with it where you invite the depression to move into there instead of yourself. I have a couple of different forms of it. You can add bits of yourself if you like you can say, depression, you've taken the spit out of me, and you can moisten the thread with your saliva and add that and say, why don't you do that here, sort of thing. And over time, it just kind of builds up, and then you keep it in a container so you don't have to look at it, because it should get unpleasant for you to look at it, because, well, it's something that you didn't like inside of you. You're not going to like looking at it when it's outside of you either. It reminds you of awful, visceral, traumatic stuff. Yeah,
but how wonderful to give it a name, to give it a place, to allow it to live externally. I've done some and I'll be super honest with you, depression is not something as a whole. Like, I've been depressed because of a situation. Depression as a whole is not something that is part of my mental health issues. I'm much more on the other side of dealing with anxiety. And really, like, sides of the same coin, opposite sides of the same coin. And often the techniques are very similar. And the anxiety kind of thing of, I can't get out of bed because everything's too overwhelming, and everything, sensory overload versus, I need a dark space to go into because I can't deal. That is something that I've dealt with quite a bit in my life. And one of the techniques that I've used in therapy that I haven't really thought about using in my craft, using witchcraft, is the mental visualization of putting all these fears into a box and then putting that box on the shelf, and then being able to take that box off the shelf and look at those fears and go through them and see which ones are real, which ones are mine, which ones don't belong to me. Right. Because we often take on the fears and worries and doubts of others that have nothing to do with us. Is that true in depression as well as in anxiety?
Oh, sure. And depression is often the gift of our families too.
Thank them for that.
If you didn't have ancestors who experienced depression themselves, you might have had ancestors who experienced the trauma that led to your depression, because they behaved in a way due to their trauma that helped wear away your natural defenses and let this spirit in.
Do you feel that depression is generational in terms of, are you familiar with the concepts of cell memory and the generational cell memory of traumas being passed through the bloodlines?
Yes.
Right. So people that, maybe you had, 3 generations back, maybe there was physical abuse or, emotional abuse or something. And that literally something that I've dealt with a lot in terms of like, my own workings is like, okay, maybe there was generations back, there could have been sexual abuse through the females. And then you get, maybe if I was never sexually abused, but it could have been the cell memory of the great grandmother to the grandmother to the mother. And then the daughter having these trauma responses to things that never actually happened to her personally, because it's through the cell memory. Do you think that depression, that spirit of depression, could also be linked to the cell memories or the generational traumas of our biological families?
I certainly do. And that's why I think our ancestors are an important part of our community when we're dealing with depression.
How would one combine the ancestral magic with this method of witchcraft to deal with depression?
I think it's important to ask the ancestors, or we know that we can heal our ancestors and thus heal ourselves. And I think it's important to ask our ancestors for guidance on what sort of traumas they experienced that we can work on healing through practices like ancestor elevation or others that help us heal our lines to because that's where the roots of this spirit walking with us came in. And it could go back very, very far, because I think depression is an old companion. It's kind of like, one of the analogies I use is mitochondria. Mitochondria used to be a separate organism, but it's just fused into our beings now, as it is with most life on Earth. And I think depression is almost the same thing. It's just it doesn't exist without us, but it sure does thrive with us.
The way you talk about this, Terence, it's so, for me, visceral, and so eye-opening. I'm a little bit like blown away by your concepts and your embracing of the spirit of depression. I feel like so many people are going to resonate with this book, and they're really going to find something tangible in something that has been so intangible. Was that a goal for you in writing this book, or was this more of you needed to get it out of you and share your experience? Or was
I absolutely did not want to write this book.
Really? Really?
Oh yeah, as I said, nobody wants to write this book. But I felt if Heather Green is going to offer me the opportunity to write a book, and that's the book that was offered, then, well, I should write it, even though I didn't want to. And thus my goal was more like the former. I wanted to help give people hope that there's something on the other side, and that it's not even all negative, which actually was something I sort of learned through this book. One of the people I had the pleasure of interviewing was Orion Foxwood, and Orion is such a spiritual person, and recognizes things like the fact that, as one quote was, it's okay to be sad. And the darkness is part of the cycle, and we need those quiet times as well, and depression might just be a way of ensuring that we get that.
Wonderful concept. Oftentimes we talk about shadow work, right?
Mm-hmm.
And nobody likes shadow work. Nobody wants to go, right? I was recently interviewing Michael Herkus, who goes by the moniker Glam Witch, if you don't know him. And we were talking about like deep self-love and looking in the mirror. And that the first thing we do in the morning when we wake up is we look in the mirror and we see all the things we hate about ourselves. And the mirror as a magical tool that amplifies everything you focus on. So you're looking in the mirror and you're focusing on, oh, I have this zit, or I hate my nose, or I'm so fat, or my life sucks, or whatever it is. And now you're amplifying that magically into the world. So to look at that and go, well, the shadow work there is to look truly at yourself and say, what is it I really don't like? And how can I fix it? Why is this there? How do I learn to love even the things that I don't like? Right. So I feel like that depression being that spirit that you might see in the mirror, or that the spirit of depression in the mirror clouding your view, and you being able to say, I see you and I acknowledge you. that is the hard work of looking inward and doing that shadow work that we must do to get to the light side of things. Would you agree?
I'm having a hard time believing you haven't read this book yet, because it feels like you're quoting from a mirror still. I have it here.
I am not. I literally got it in the mail like maybe like 5 days ago. I mean, we only just booked this, right? So
Yeah,
I found you, I booked this, and I ordered your book, and it literally came. I was today's Saturday that we're recording this. I think it came on like Monday or Tuesday, and it's been sitting on my kitchen table. And I've read the introduction. I read just the beginning and the disclaimers and the forward. That's what I read. But this is the work that I do. So it actually is really making me feel good to know that I'm not crazy. And and you're like, no, that's it. That's exactly it. But these concepts are so important. And oftentimes, don't you feel like in the witchcraft community and the pagan community, there's like a handful of people that are like, yeah, shadow work, you got to get it done. You got to get it done. And then there's other people that are like, no, love and light and crystals and astrology. Meh. And you're like, no, you got to dig in and look at the ugly stuff so that you can get to the light. You need both parts. Am I right?
You do.
And how has that been for you? I mean, you've obviously been on your path for a long time, right? You've been on this pagan path. How long have you, I mean, what does it say? What does your bio say? Like years and years you've been on this path and you've been.
Yeah, I think 88 is when I realized it was starting.
So at what point did you realize there was something that getting into that shadow work and going deeper into that? Or is that more recent as you've waded through the depression stuff?
Yeah, one of the things that I dislike about getting older is the recognition that the phrase, when you're older, you'll understand, is true. Because it's condescending and infuriating, but it's also true.
Yes.
And there are things that you just can't understand until you've been through them. And it took me a while to get there, because I tend to be one of the stiff-necked people, and I tend to learn things the hard way through my own experience more than anything else. No matter how brilliant and thoughtful my teachers have been, I do have to figure it out my own way. And that took a while, and it didn't have to take that long, but I think it always has to take that long, unfortunately.
Oh, you said you're one of those people that needs to learn things the hard way, right? Yeah. Like the Aries is screaming at you, right? And then you're like, yeah, I hear you later. You know, if you don't pay attention, whichever gods you're working with, they will just keep giving you the same lesson over and over again until you get it, right? And you're sitting there going, why do I keep getting the same lesson? Why do these things keep happening to me? Well, you're not listening. You know, and that's hard, because when you're 20 something, you're like, of course I'm listening. I know everything. And then all of a sudden you're 40 and you're like, oh, maybe I don't know shit. You know? Like,
yeah.
True. It's so true. Is there a pivotal moment for you where you began to listen to those messages? Like, can you pinpoint that, or was it over time?
I think it was a course of years that that preceded and went past my my sudden conversion to the Hellenic path.
Oh, I want to hear all about that. I'm very interested in your conversion to Hellenic path, because I have not yet interviewed anyone who, who follows that particular path. What we're going to do is we're going to take a very quick break. Mm-hmm. So we can hear from our wonderful sponsors, and then we'll come back and we'll talk all about that. Does that sound good to you?
Perfect.
Excellent. We will be right back with the really fantastic Terence Ward. We are back with the fantastic, really insightful, very vibrant Terence Ward. Now, I don't know if that's a fancy yellow background behind you or your radiant smile, but you're bringing a lot of joy to me. And I'm really enjoying this deep and introspective conversation. That's one of the great joys of doing this podcast program, is meeting new people, learning about their paths, and is on a little selfish note, what I get to learn from you, like it's like my own personal little spiritual counseling and eye-opening. So it's really great. And I'm so grateful that you decided to join us. So before the break, we were going to talk about you said your conversion into the Hellenic traditions, and following those gods in the Hellenic tradition. And I'm really curious about that. It's not really something I know a lot about, and I would love to hear about your journey and why and how that happened, and then how that kind of translates into what's going on in the modern witchcraft world and your own workings.
Yeah. I know a lot of people have what they call an eclectic period in their spiritual path. I prefer polytraditional. I tried to absorb as many different types of paganism as I could, but I went to a small college and there wasn't too much to find out. And honestly, in the 80s, it was basically all Wicca.
Yes. You're 100% right. You're
100% even though it wasn't all called Wicca, it was really all Wicca.
Yeah.
Or something that was modeled heavily after Wicca, even though I know it certainly wasn't traditional Wicca, because I've talked to some like British traditional Wiccans and I know it's different.
Yeah.
There's a lot missing.
Yeah.
But I really absolutely felt that there was something bigger and profounder out there, but I could never quite figure out what it was. And which is ironic because, when I was very small, I loved the Greek myths. It was some of the earliest reading that I did. My dad had lots of books of that stuff because he was really into that stuff too. I have Greek heritage on my mother's side, and it all was awfully cool and everything. But like most of us, I was taught this is all in the past. We're modern people. We know there's only one big sky god now.
It's infuriating. Right. And he looks exactly like Zeus. I don't know. How did that happen?
Funny thing. But strangely, we come back to Kirk White, because when I was at a one of the events at Kirk White's property, Laurelland Retreat, there was a Hellenic group out of Boston there. It named Dietalis, that was led by Maureen Reddington Wild, among others. And they led like a procession through the woods to a number of shrines to different gods, and chanting in Greek with these big candles that we were holding, kept us blind and stumbling. And it was awfully fun and exhausting and really intense.
Wow.
And I said, wow, you mean they actually practice this as a religion? It's not just like a bunch of like arbitrary stories written by some bitter old men about how they think the gods are acting in the world. Right. Because I realized that, I've come to realize that myths are our best attempt at explaining what we see in the world that's invisible. And it doesn't mean that they're literal truth, as most pagans know, and some people in other religions know, but not all of them. And it's, once I was able to get over the idea that because I had a pretty visceral reaction to some of the gods, like frankly, Ares scared the bejesus out of me.
Of course he did.
And
a scary dude.
And when I ended up joining a specific group and the divination came up with Poseidon, I was like, oh, come on.
Wow.
There's someone who brooks no foolery.
Right.
But I've come to realize that, when you think about it, if you are an ancient seafaring people, you're going to be a little scared of the ocean god.
Well, the ocean is scary in itself, right? I mean, and
and you should respect it.
You should respect it. I love what you said about explaining the unseen, right?
Yeah.
The invisible forces, and so much of mythology and, and not just mythology, but so much of interpretations of energy into gods is explaining that which we cannot see, that we interpret in this way. And who can, which interpretation is the one that speaks to you, which I think is what's so interesting about this, is that here you were working with these gods that you weren't really that familiar with, except for the mythology that you had read as a child. And then all of a sudden you're like, wow, they are so real at this moment. Wow. Yeah. So cool. So Poseidon comes in and you're like, crap.
Yeah. And frankly, there was another cycle of me not wanting what I was being offered.
Wow.
And I was like, oh yeah, apparently Poseidon is part of my life. And another polytheist I knew said to me one time, for someone who's apparently like connected to Poseidon, you talk about other gods a whole lot more.
Wow, really?
Yeah. And I did some real deep thinking on that, and what it led to was my first self-published book, which was Poseidon told me to write hymns and prayers to Poseidon, and I wrote them. Greek gods have a lot of epithets, and some of them hundreds. But I was tasked with. I would wake up every day, and there'd be another one that I had to write, and I didn't know which epithet it was going to be or what it was going to be about until I sat down. But it was the first thing I did every morning.
Wow.
And it was a pretty amazing experience, and it all went into my blog, and then eventually got turned into a book called Depths of Praise, and that helped me align my relationship with Poseidon by understanding who this god is.
Right.
Because it's Poseidon is even though the ocean is vast and inconceivably large, Poseidon is far bigger than that. Poseidon is an earth god. Poseidon is the plant nourisher. That's what one of the epithets means.
Wow.
Which you wouldn't expect from salt water.
Yeah. But all life comes from the ocean.
Yeah.
Right.
You're not wrong.
All life. And again, what I love so often, the combination of magic and science, and mythology and science, and what we know with modern science, and how our faiths and beliefs and spiritual connections amplify what we know to be hard evidence of science, right? So we know hard evidence of science, life came from the ocean. Mm-hmm. All life came from the ocean. And now here you have Poseidon as this god of life and the depths of the oceans, and like everything that you were just saying. And I know nothing about Poseidon, but ocean god. That's all I know. So this is really eye-opening for me to learn about him in this way. That's brilliant. That's brilliant. So you wrote all of this whole book as a devotion to him, pretty much. Wow. And how did that change your practice, like overall?
It actually put me on the path to priesthood.
Wow.
It was a pretty big change.
Yeah.
As I went from a sort of reluctant devotee to someone who actually is like into the practice.
And it sounds like you weren't given much of a choice, that these inspirations were coming to you and the gods were sort of going, yeah, you need to do this. No, and you having the awareness of self and spirit to say yes, to agree and to take on that mantle and that responsibility. I don't think everybody could do that. And I don't think everybody would listen as well as you listened in that moment.
I think it came to me in the way it did because I write. I think someone, maybe you would have been asked to cook.
Well, I have had Hecate yell at me about what I need to cook. And I have had her when I first started working with her like 10 years ago. I know I was late to the party and working with her. And I really was. I used to, work a lot with Bridget, but I also used to work with just a general goddess energy without putting like a name on it. And I was asked to, maybe 12 years ago at this point, 10 or 12 years ago, I was asked to cater the feast of Hecate for the Temple of Witchcraft. And I was like, yeah, sure. I don't know anything. Sure. I never worked with Hecate before. What the hell? Yeah, I'll make it work. And so for like weeks before, I was, learning about her and buying statuary. So I had, a place for her on my altar and inviting her in and doing my meditations with her. And I started making food that I never even tried, like things I never tasted, things I had never eaten. And I was like, Hecate says she needs tuna with apples and grapes. And she also needs brie and she needs honey soaked pears. And I was like, I don't know. And I remember Justin came home. I had been cooking. This was like the third day of cooking for this feast. It was for like 100 people. And he came home and the air was like thick with incense and energy. And he was like, what is going on? And I was, to this day, I couldn't tell you what was happening in that moment because I was in like a complete trance state. So you're right.
Wow.
Like for me, it came through in the inspiration of the goddess Hecate wants this as her offering, or as her, what she wants me to create for her looks like this, because my medium is food, where your medium is words. How brilliant is that?
This is an excellent segue.
Oh, tell me.
Well, there is a Hellenic practice called Deipnon, which is a feast for Hecate that happens at the dark of the moon. And one of the practices that it's used for is to help take the miasma, the spiritual gook, out of your life with Hecate's help. And I modified that for my book to be a Deipnon specifically for depression.
Oh, how wonderful. Oh, I'm going to have to, do you know where that is in the book? Because I'm going to have to.
Wait, I marked it.
Did you?
Because I figured you'd want to know this.
Did I bring this up?
Yeah. Hang on. Where is that thing?
And foods for Hecate, they're always, whenever I'm cooking in devotion for her, her tastes change, and it's so interesting to see what she wants. She almost always wants something with grapes. She always wants something, with soaked in honey, or the flavors of honey, or a sauce made out of something that has that sweetness to it. When I'm working with her, she almost always asks for those things. So that's really interesting. Okay, tell me, where is it?
Page 180.
180. I'm gonna look it up right now.
I don't give specific foods because that's not my forte. But I bet you can do a phenomenal. I'm sure you've done. I wish I'd been at that Temple of Witchcraft piece.
And I did it for a couple of years. I did it for a couple of years until it got too big. And I was like, trying to cook in that way, in such a ritualistic way for days and for so many people. It just, I think I did it for like 3 years in a row or 4 years in a row. And then it just became something I couldn't handle anymore, because the ritual went from being like 100 people to being 200 people. And I just,
wow.
I couldn't do it anymore. And obviously since COVID, there hasn't been a big ritual like that. But still for Hecate, in August on Hecate's day, I will cook something, even if it's just for us, but I'm really interested in this, and I'm going to let you know what I come up with, because it's fantastic. And I love how you go into, so for you guys, if you're going to get this book, on page 180 and 181, Terence goes through the ritual to set up and how to, food for sharing with living humans. I love that. so it's like, here's your offering, but then here's food that you want to have to share with other people. This is just, it's brilliant. It's really brilliant, Terence. I have to say, I think this book is incredibly timely.
I didn't mean it to be, but you're right. I had no idea there was going to be a pandemic. No one told me.
Right. But maybe the gods knew.
Yeah.
You know, and to have something like this come out when so many people are feeling, even if it's a situational depression, like collectively, I feel like as community and as a human race, there's so much hurt and there's so much pain, and how we all internalize that. Even if you're not suffering with clinical depression, and you may be, and if you are, you should seek the help you need, and you should read this book, and you should get your therapy, and you should do all the things you need to do. But even if you're just feeling the weight of the world on your shoulders and you're in a moment of depression, what Terence has come up with here is so insightful, and it's so timely. And these techniques can be used to help you manage what you're feeling through what we're all going through collectively, and then how it affects us as an individual. Maybe you didn't plan to do it that way, but I think there's a world of people, including myself, that are really going to get so much out of this, and are really just so grateful that you're here and that you've come through the other side of your depression to offer this and your experience to us. Really, truly grateful for that. Really. So not to get like too heavy, because now I'm all like emotional.
Well, we are talking about depression,
right? I mean, it's impossible not to feel so deeply when talking about these topics, and learning about your journey and your workings with the gods and all of that. So just quickly back to your Hellenic practice. You had mentioned earlier that you have Greek ancestry.
Yes.
Did any of that play into you finding that path, and have you tapped into any of that ancestry as you've worked with these particular gods?
Yes, I've actually, one of the ways that I try to work with my ancestors is through genealogy, to learn more about who they were.
Yeah.
And because my Greek grandfather died when I was pretty young, and his parents died more than 100 years ago.
Wow.
Because he was what he called the Benjamin, the Venia men, which is the youngest child. He was the youngest of 10. My mother was the youngest of his 6, and I was the youngest of her 5. So there's a long stretch in our generations.
Wow. That is.
And thus they stretch back to like my great grandparents. I think I'm pretty sure they were escaping Greek persecution in the Ottoman Empire when they came to this country, because even though my grandfather and all of his siblings were Greek, they were born in what was then Turkey. It's right. Now a Greek city, but it was a Turkish city, but they were ethnically Greek.
Right.
And but I've tried to learn who they were, and they were deeply devoutly Greek Orthodox Catholic. And you really have to dig back far, because even though we think the Greek myths are really cool, boy, they dipped on their religion pretty early in our history, in terms of being rolled over by monotheists.
Wow. Yeah. You don't really think about it.
That was a long time ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And yet that's
myths, why you could say these gods are dead.
Yeah, but those myths persevere, and it's amazing to think of how those myths persevere into even like pop cultures and just, I mean, everything. Everybody knows the Greek myths, you learn them when you're a kid, but they're relegated to myth,
if someone becomes a Hellenic polytheist, like I met a kid at Twilight, not at the Feast of Lights one year. He was like 13 years old, and he said, "Oh, I'm a Hellenic polytheist," and he had been introduced through Percy Jackson. It's like,
Yes.
that's fine by me. They will
Yes.
use any route they can to get to you.
Yes. Right. Exactly. Similarly, my husband follows the Norse path. And so many people are like, oh yeah, Marvel, Thor, Loki. And they start to research and they go, oh wow, these are real gods. Oh wow, these are real energies. So yeah, like you said, any path, whatever it takes for that energy and that spirit to inspire you, I take it. Percy Jackson's pretty cool. Like, especially if you're a kid and you're reading those books, they're pretty fun books. Not that I'm a proponent of reading children's books as an adult. No, I totally am.
I certainly never read any of the Percy Jackson books.
I haven't read any of them. I've seen a movie or two, but I know some young adults that loved those books, just like people finding the path of witchcraft because they loved Harry Potter,
Sure.
They go, here's the allegory, here's the fiction. And then they realize that there actually is a world of real witchcraft and real spells and things like that. And being able to just that opening of the door into this world. And we, like you said, we'll take it where we can get it. Right.
Mm-hmm.
It's just wonderful. Terence, it's really wonderful to talk with you about all this stuff. And so we're kind of running out of time. So I want to make sure that we get in all the important information. Yeah, all the important information. So the name of the book is called Empty Cauldrons. And where can we find it online? Where can we buy it? And how do we connect with you online if we have questions or if you're teaching any classes or things like that?
Well, it is, the book is published through Llewellyn and can be ordered through that site. I think there's some large online retailers, can't remember any of their names, that sell these books. I always recommend people talk to their local bookstore owners if they're interested in any book, because local bookstore owners can get any book you need. My website is truepaganwarrior.com.
Truepaganwarrior.com. And I'm sure at that site, there are links for this book and for being able to find you on places like Facebook and Instagram.
Absolutely. Even Twitter.
Oh, you tweet. I'm new at tweeting. My social media person is like, you got to do it. I'm like, oh crap. Okay. But so Terence P Ward, the book is called Empty Cauldrons, Navigating Depression Through Magic and Ritual. It's pretty effing brilliant, Terence. I'm
really glad you think so.
I think it's appropriate. I think it's timely. I think it's going to help so many people. And I can't thank you enough for that. Now, one last question before we go, which is what I asked to all of my guests. It's totally off topic, but it's a fun question. For me as a kitchen witch, my art is cooking and food. So if you could choose to have me cook you one magical meal, what would it be and why?
All right. It just so happens that we are recording this on my late mother's birthday.
Oh, happy birthday to your mom.
And one of the things that I haven't had in a very long time is mom's lasagna.
Oh, lasagna. Oh, yeah.
And being that mom didn't have a lick of Italian in her, you might actually do a better job.
Yeah, but if you want your mom's lasagna, I'd have to make it the way I'd have to make it like if she used ketchup instead of tomato sauce, I'd have to use ketchup.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Like I have a friend who's like, she's from the Midwest and she puts cottage cheese in her lasagna. I'm like, are you out of your disgusting? But that's the way her mom did it. And that's the way her grandmother did it. So when I make lasagna the real way with ricotta cheese, she's like, it's okay. It needs cottage cheese. Oh, I love it. I love meat lasagna or meatless lasagna.
Meat. I have never been able. I've always felt I should become a vegan, but I haven't had the strength.
Me neither. I just try to eat as local and humanely raised as possible, right? Well, all right, my friend, it's been wonderful to chat with you. And I thank you so much for spending this time with me. Again, everyone, it's Terence Ward. Empty Cauldrons. You can find it at Llewellyn or any of your local small booksellers. Go get this book. It's really fantastic. And I am so excited to delve deeper into it. Terence, thank you so much for being here. It was absolutely a pleasure. Absolutely a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And until next time, I wish everyone many blessings and so much gratitude.